Hello. Today I'll be talking about the game The Adventures of Robin Hood. I believe this came out in 2021. I just recently received it from my Board Game Geek Secret Santa. So let's talk about how to set up and play. Alright, the first thing you're going to do is take the game board pieces out of this sleeve, and well, if I can get that out, and you'll assemble the board. So let me do that. Alright, so once your board is assembled, it will look something like this, or exactly like this. Though as you play further in the adventures, some of your tiles, you'll see the board is made up of tiles that you can flip over. As you play further along through the adventure, some of these tiles may be flipped up already when you start an adventure. The rule sheet then says just to dump all the wooden pieces into one pile somewhere near the board. I don't like to do that. I like to separate them out, because if you're needing to draw a violet cube or a white cube or a colored cube, you don't want to have to dig through one pile to find the piece you're looking for. So I like to separate them. Then each player will choose a character. Some of the stories specify, or some of the adventures specify, one or more characters that have to be involved. In the introductory adventure, you have to have Little John and Robin Hood. So Robin Hood, if you choose a Robin Hood character, he's the green. You'll take the two standing figures, and then you have these three movement figures. So each player will take that for the players they're going to use. Again, for the introductory scenario, it said we need Robin Hood, which is green, and Little John, which is blue. So we'll take their 5 figures. Again, you have 2 standing figures and then 3 movement figures, and then you can choose between Maid Marian, which is yellow, and Will Scarlet, which is the turquoise. I think we'll use Maid Marian, so we'll just set the Will Scarlet pieces aside. Set all these other wooden pieces aside for right now. They are not player for the players. I will say I'm going to go ahead and have the players take the cubes and disc in their color. Again, the rules just say keep them all in a pile with all the wooden pieces, but as I said, I like to separate them. These pieces, again, we'll set aside, and we'll have Maid Marian. So we've got Maid Marian, Robin Hood, and Little John will be our players, as we're going to play a 3-player game. Alright, you'll then take the cloth bag and place that somewhere near the board. And the Adventures of Robin Hood book, you'll take that and place that somewhere where all players can reach it. So for the introductory scenario, the rule sheet says to turn to page 8 in the book and continue from there, so let's do that. Alright, so as we see here, chapter 1, The Escape, it says, England in the year of our Lord 1133. The guard shoved Little John forward. The chain he had been tied up with rubbed against his wrist. Through his hood he recognized the silhouette of the approaching gallows. Now flip the oval tile on the game board with the number 1 on it in the castle courtyard. This is the guard. Now lay one of Little John's standing figures on this guard. So you'll see this is the castle courtyard. This is the number 1 on this tile. We flip it over, and that reveals a guard. And we lay Little John down, one of Little John's standing figures down there. That means he's been captured by that guard, and we'll go over that a little bit more in a little bit. So then the book continues. His heart was racing and his mind started to wander. Is this the end? Is this the just punishment for all my deeds? Or is there still a way for me to escape? Then it says, now flip over the beggar tile, number 110, before the castle wall to the left of the gate. So that's this one. So we will flip it over, and he disappears. It also says to flip over the straw wagon tile number 214 so that it is not visible either. Then it also says to flip over the wheel up here in the forest so it is not visible. And the merchant down here number 120 so that it is not visible. Then says the Robin Hood figure will place one of his standing figures on the oval tile number 11 up here in the top left of the forest. It says if the Maid Marian figure is playing, she should stand on the number 9 oval tile here. And if the Will Scarlet player was playing, he would place his figure on number 75. Alright, next it says each player will take their disc of their color and place that into the bag, like so. And then it also says to take one of the red disc and throw it into the bag as well. And for the introductory scenario, that is pretty much it for the setup, other than it then goes on to tell you what the aim of this introductory adventure is and how you win it. I don't want to spoil anything. This is a story-driven game, so you play through the adventures consecutively, and that continues the story. I don't want to spoil any of the adventures, so I'll just go ahead and tell you how you play. Now, in this game, the introductory adventure introduces you to a few of the rules, and when you go to the next adventure, it introduces a few more rules. And when you go to the next adventure, it introduces even more rules. So as you play through the first several adventures, you learn new rules to the game. Obviously, I'm not going to go through several adventures, so I'll just kind of explain all the rules, or most of the rules, the basic rules that you'll learn through the first several adventures, without talking about the adventures and spoiling anything about it. So, first thing we'll talk about, when we took the players' cubes and put them into the bag. So to determine whose turn it is, one player, doesn't matter who, will reach into the bag and pull out one disc. They'll place it over here on the wagon wheel, and that player, in this case green, the Robin Hood player, will take their turn. So the first thing a player will do on their turn is move if they want to. Well, the way a player moves is by using these movement figures. So if Robin Hood wanted to move maybe over here, maybe he wanted to go talk to this person. Well, his figure is here. Now you can't move over trees or rocks or walls or buildings or rivers or other characters, so you have to move around them. Now this light shaded area is called a clearing, and then in the shade here is basically the shade, but you'll see the paths. You can move over these water puddles, but you can see the paths you can move along. This is another clearing, and we'll explain the significance of that here in a little bit. And then this is shade around these trees here, but you can see you can move over here. So when you move, you use your movement figures. So you start by placing one of your movement figures, touching the standing figure you already have on the board. Again, it can't cross over trees or rocks or walls or people or rivers. You basically have to stay, moving along the path. You can't cross over any other type of object or person or whatever. So then you can use one of your other movement figures by touching the one you laid down previously, and then you can use your other movement figure. And then finally you place your last standing figure, as long as it touches that, and then you pick up all the figures you previously had, and now you've moved as far as you can. So on Robin Hood's next turn, if he wanted to get to this figure to interact with it, then he can move again by placing, this movement figure here, and then this movement, as long as at least part of your figure is touching, then he's gotten to that person, as long as you're at least touching the tile that they're on, then he removes his, oops, I knocked him, move the movement figures, and then he can interact with that, which we'll talk about in a second. So, just to be clear again, you couldn't, if you were down here, you couldn't put your movement figure over this cart and walk, and move that way. You would have to go around it, up here, this way, and then this way. So, and you couldn't go over these rocks here. You would have to go over, if you want to move there, you're going to have to go up and around. Like so. Anyway, I think you get the drift. Now, one other thing to say about movement. If you just need to move a short distance, like maybe just if you just wanted to move to this tile 16 for some reason, you were going to put this here and your figure here, well, that would get you there. But I was just going to say, you can, as long as your movement figure is touching you, you can kind of put it alongside you, and then put your next figure like that. So you don't have to use the full length of a movement figure. And even if you were really close, you don't even have to use one of these movement figures at all. You could just place your next standing figure like so, and pick up the other one, and then you'd be touching that tile. One more thing to talk about movement. When it's your turn to move, if you don't, you'll notice that two of the movement figures are shorter. They're the same length, but you have one long movement figure. Now, when it's your turn and you move, if you don't use your long figure, if you only use your, one or more of your short figures, or maybe just your other standing figure, as long as you don't use your long figure when you move, then you're saving strength or saving energy. And that allows you to take one white cube out of the supply and throw it into the bag. And we'll talk about the significance of that here in a minute. If you don't move at all, on your turn, if you choose not to move, or you don't move at all because you're captured, like little John is up here, captured by this guard, if you don't move at all, or you can't move because you're captured, then you still save energy and you still get to throw a white cube into the bag. So in the introductory scenario, after you move, the next thing you can do on your turn is one of two options. You can examine a tile with a question mark if you've landed on it, if you're touching it. Like so, you could examine this tile. Or you can attempt to defeat a guard, or, well, in the introductory scenario, it's just a guard, but later on there'll be other types of people you can defeat, like a nobleman or a special character, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Let's first talk about examining a tile. Later, now, I just mentioned in the introductory scenario, after moving, you can examine a tile or attempt to defeat a guard. As I said, later, there's other types of people you can defeat, and also there'll be a third option you can do, which is pass an object from one player character to another. So if two characters are next to each other, one's touching the other one after you've moved, or whether you didn't move at all, you can pass an object. So Robin Hood could pass an object if it was his turn and he was touching Maid Marian. He could pass an object that he was carrying to her, and we'll talk about how that works here in a little bit. Let's first talk about examining a tile. So if after you moved you were touching tile 90 here, you could then examine it. So to examine it doesn't mean you necessarily flip it over. What it means is you'll turn to page 90 in the book. And so you'll see I turn to page 90 in the book. That person on that tile is the guardian of the forest. And then depending on what adventure you're doing, it will tell you where else to turn in the book, because for each adventure, what that happens at that tile will be different. So if you were playing the adventure The Escape, you would turn to page 91 and read what it says there. If you were playing Adventure 2, A Safe Hiding Place, you would turn to page 92 and read there. So what happens at a tile is different, again, depending on the adventure. Now, I don't want to show you what happens, even on the introductory scenario, because I don't want to spoil anything. But usually it'll have a description, or if it's a character like this, it'll have some conversation in the book that you've had with this character. And then it may or may not say to flip the tile over after you've spoken with that character. So for in this case, maybe it does say to flip it over afterwards. And then that character is no longer there, so there won't be any more interacting with that character during this scenario, unless some other piece of story happens later on that has you flip it back over again. And when you are reading a page for a character, it may give you options. Like A, B, or C. It'll read some flavor text, and then it may say, are you A, asking this character for help? B, asking this character if they know about a certain person, or C. And so if it's your turn, another player, one of the other players, will actually read that page in the book and give you the options, and then you choose. And then they tell you, then you'll look down and it'll say if that person chose A, you read here. If it chose B, you read here, and C, you read here. So one of the other players will do the reading for you if it's your turn, and you can read for one of the other players when it's their turn. But maybe there's not always an A, B, or C choice. Maybe it just has one paragraph that you read and some outcome that comes from that. And to add even more variety, I showed you that depending on the scenario, each tile and the description you'll read about that in the book will be different depending on the scenario. It can even be different if you have to play a scenario over again. So if it's the first time you play a scenario, there'll be one set of options. You'll have this shield over here set to 1. If you're playing a scenario for the second time, you flip that over and it'll be to 2, and then you'll know when you turn to that page in the book for the scenario that you're reading, there'll be a choice for if you're playing it for the first time, or a choice if you're playing it the second time. So if you're having to replay a scenario, maybe because you failed it the first time, when you're playing it the second time, you're not going to have the same outcome, because there's going to be a different section of the book to read, so it won't be the same. Now, if you have to replay a scenario for a third time, then you go ahead and just keep reading the second scenario options, and the rules say that way you know what's going to happen there, and that will help you to complete the scenario. So any tile with a question mark is one that you can examine. So again, if you're on a tile with a question mark, you can examine it if you're touching it, and you do that by turning to that page in the book and reading depending on which adventure you're on, as I showed. If a tile does not have a question mark, such as one of these, and you can see there's lots of tiles that don't have question marks, then you can't examine those. So there's no place in the book to go to turn those over. Those will get turned over by other means. maybe coming and talking to this person when you're reading what happens from the conversation you have from them. It may say, turnover tile 193 or turnover tile, 17 or something like that. So that's how those other tiles will get turned over. And certainly not every tile does not get turned over in every adventure. Only a few tiles will end up getting turned over in adventures. Alright, so to go over it again, when a player's disc is drawn, it is their turn. The first thing they'll do on their turn is move using some or all of their movement figures, always placing their last standing figure at the end of their movement figures, so that's where they end up, and then pick up all the other movement figures. Then they can either, if they're touching a tile with a question mark, they can examine there, or they can attempt to defeat a guard or a nobleman. And again, as I mentioned in the introductory scenario, there's just guards, but there will be noblemen in further scenarios that you can try to defeat, and other things such as special characters or carriages, and we'll talk about those a little bit. But first, let's talk about defeating a guard. So Little John, in the beginning of this scenario, is captured. Again, when you're captured, your character is laid down on the guard. So on Little John's turn, he can't move because he's captured, so he would get to toss one white cube into the bag because he saved strength or saved energy. And then he can, even though he can't move, he can attempt to defeat the guard. So when you attempt to defeat a guard, you'll draw cubes out of the bag. Now, at some point during the scenario, usually at the beginning of a scenario, it will tell you to put a certain amount of cubes into the bag. For instance, I've played through the first 3 scenarios of this game, so normally it'll tell you to put 6 violet cubes and 1 white cube for each player that's playing into the bag. And then, as I mentioned, you can throw 1 white cube into the bag for every time it's your turn and you don't use your long figure because you save energy. But when you're attempting to defeat a guard, for example, what you'll do is draw cubes out of the bag one at a time, up to 3 cubes, and if you draw a white cube out, then you're successful and you defeat the guard. If you end up just drawing 3 violet cubes, then you don't defeat the guard and nothing else happens other than you're still captured. When you draw a cube, you don't put it back in the bag, you just put it back in the supply. If the first cube you draw out is a white cube, then you would just stop right there. You wouldn't go ahead and draw the other 2 cubes. If the first cube you draw was a violet, then you'd put it back in the supply. Then you draw again. If the next cube you drew was a white, then you would be successful. You would go ahead and put that one back in the supply, and you would not draw the 3rd cube out, and so forth. So you draw a maximum of 3 cubes out, but you always stop once you're successful. And if you end up drawing, all 3 and you got a violet cube for all 3, then, as I said, you're not successful and you just stay captured. Now, some of the special characters that you may end up trying to defeat or carriages require you to pull 2 white cubes out. So if you pull the first cube, it's a violet, and you pull the second cube and it's a violet, well, you're not going to be successful, so you can just not bother drawing the 3rd cube because you couldn't be successful with only 1 left to go. So you don't have to draw the 3rd cube if you know you're not going to be able to be successful in that case. So just to give an example, I've thrown some violet cubes and white cubes in here, and we'll say Little John's trying to defeat this guard, so he's going to reach in and pull a cube out, and, well, maybe And I got a violet, so I would just put that back in the supply. I can still pull up to 2 more. So reach in, and this bag holds, still holds the discs for players' turns, so you don't want to pull those out. But all right, now I pulled out a white, so I'm successful. I don't have to bother drawing the third cube out. So when you're successful defeating a guard, you go ahead and flip it back over. You'll also see there's an icon on here. This is called the Bard icon, and it says +1. So we'll talk about that here in just a minute, but you go ahead and flip the guard back over. You put a red hourglass token on him, so he won't be able to basically respawn, and we'll talk about how that happens in a little bit. Then you can stand your figure up, and on your next turn you'll be able to move as normal. But talking about that Bard token, and it said +1. In the introductory scenario, we didn't do this, but in most scenarios, it will tell you to place this Bard figure along the banner of hope here on a number dependent on the number of players, and I think normally for 3 players, at least in the adventures that I've done so far, you start that at 7. So when you defeat a guard, it said +1, you actually get to move up the Bard figure on the banner of hope. Now, anytime a player is captured by a guard, you move 2 down on the banner of hope. And we'll talk about the significance of that in a minute. I do want to talk about how is a player captured by a guard. Now, this introductory scenario, Little John here started out being captured, but later, afterwards, a player can be captured in another manner, and we'll talk about that. Well, we'll go ahead and talk about that now. So you'll remember that one of the discs we put into the bag is the red disc. And obviously that's not one of the player colors. So when a player is drawing a disc out of the bag to see whose player's turn it is, if they draw the blue player would take their turn. If they draw the red, that's not one of the player colors. And what that means is bad things are going to happen. So it's called dark events. So the dark events will happen. Now in the introductory first couple of scenario or adventures, introductory adventure, and first couple of, after that, where they haven't introduced all the rules, fewer things happen. But once you get, I think, to this third scenario, then all the normal events happen, the dark events happen. So we'll talk about those. So if you draw the red disc, first thing that happens is carriages escape to the castle. So there may have been in the forest, there may have been one of these tiles turned over that has a carriage on it. And usually, depending on the adventure, there's something that the players may want to do by defeating a carriage. That's one of the carriages are one of the things I mentioned, that it actually takes you to pull 2 white cubes out to actually defeat a carriage, whereas with a guard it only takes 1. But if a red cube is pulled, any carriage that's visible in the forest is flipped back down to not visible, and one of the octagonal tiles is flipped over in the castle, which represents a carriage, and that means that that carriage has escaped and made it to the castle. Okay, so that's the first thing that happens if a red disc is drawn, is carriages will escape to the castle. Alright, the next thing that happens is hope in the land sinks by 1 per player. So if in a 3-player game, the Bard character would move down 1 per player along the banner of hope, because hope in the land is sinking. Okay, so after hope sinks, the next thing that happens when you're doing the dark events is a seal will be drawn from the bag. Now, in the introductory setup, we didn't do anything with these seals up here, but in future scenarios, past the introductory scenario. Normally in the setup instructions, you'll be asked to take these seals. It'll tell you one, like it'll say, let me flip these back over. It might say, take one with the lion and flip it over and put it in the number 1 slot. And put the rest of the seals in the bag. So they'll be in there along with your cubes and your player discs and so forth. So when you flip over a seal, you do what it says. So like if you're setting up the scenario, then you would probably do this. So the bard token with -1 means you would lower the bard 1 on the banner of hope. And then these other icons show tiles that you'd flip over. The red ones are guards, and the purple ones are noblemen. So you can see that this one would tell you to flip over guard number 1. Now, we just defeated him earlier. He had captured. He had Little John captured, so that wouldn't really go along with this introductory scenario setup. But like then we would need to flip over guard tile number 12. Now, so you don't have to look all over the board where's number 12. On the back of the book, you can just look right here, and it says, oh, okay, guard tile number 12 is up here. So we would know we'd come up here and flip that over to make, and that would make him visible. But, where'd that go? But if he was already visible and you drew that tile and it says to flip 12, then you would actually be flipping him back to hidden. So when you're doing these seal tiles, you're flipping them over. So if they're already flipped over, when it appears there, then you would flip it back to hidden, and if it's hidden, you flip it to visible. So as I was saying, usually you'll start with one already placed and flip over the tiles that it says during setup. But when you're doing the dark events, because you drew a red disc, then the next thing you do is after you've lowered the banner of hope by a number of spaces, 1 per player, then you'll draw another seal out of the bag and reveal it, and then you'll flip those. So this one we would flip over tiles, guard tiles 5, 8, 10, and 11. And again, you can find those by looking here. And we would flip over nobleman tiles 15, 16, and 21. Now we haven't seen the nobleman yet, so we'll just look where 15 is. Well, we can see it's actually right here. So we would flip that over, and that displays a nobleman riding a horse. And you'll see there's some icons under them, and this is what you get when you defeat a nobleman. So you would get to raise up the bard token up 2 on the banner of hope, and you'd get a sword item there. That's if you defeat him. And you defeat a nobleman just like defeating a guard. Now, when we were showing our example of defeating a guard, we showed Little John was captured. But you can defeat it even if you're not captured, as long as you move on to, let's say if this guard number 9 was visible, even if you're not captured, if you move onto their tile, then you can try to defeat them just as if you were captured by drawing tiles from drawing cubes from the bag and trying to draw a white one. So in that same manner, if you move on to a nobleman, you can try to defeat them, and it only takes 1 white cube to defeat a nobleman. And if you defeat them, then you flip them back over. You get to go up 2 for defeating a nobleman on the banner of hope, and you get whatever item is shown under that nobleman. And I'm going to talk more about how you get those items and how you show that you own those items here in a minute, and what they do, those objects. But I want to finish going over the dark events. So what we were talking about there, when you draw the red disc, you do the dark events. As we previously said, any carriages that were flipped face up on the forest are escape to the castle, so they get flipped down, and you reveal one or more in the castle if there was one or more revealed out on the board. So they escape. Then you do the hope sinks in the land. You move it down the banner of hope, one per player. Next, you draw a seal out of the bag, place it, and flip over any tiles that it says guards and noblemen. And some may flip over a carriage as well. That'll be more of a oval icon on there, and it'll tell you which number that is to flip over. And again, as I mentioned, if they're already face up and they're depicted here, then you flip them face down. If they're face down, then you flip them face up. Now there are some exceptions to that. As I mentioned, when you defeat a guard, and also when you defeat a nobleman, you'll flip them face down and you'll place an hourglass on them. When a seal is revealed, if here it showed to flip over guard 1 and he's got an hourglass on him, then he would not get flipped over. So if when a seal is revealed, it says to flip over a guard or a nobleman, but they have an hourglass on them because they were recently defeated, they would not get flipped back over. Also, if a guard has a player captured, and we still haven't talked about how a player captures a guard, but that's coming up here in just a second. If a guard has a player captured when a seal is revealed, and it would say to flip them face down, so like if the seal showed guard number 9 on it, you would not flip him face down if he has a captured player on him. But otherwise, you flip them over the opposite side of which way they are currently facing. Alright, so next thing that happens in the dark events, after you've drawn the seal and flipped over any tiles that have to be flipped over, the next thing that happens is guards attack. And this is how you can get captured. So if your player figure is in the same clearing, and remember a clearing is the light area, so this all the light area right here is a clearing. So a shaded area is safe. So it's always good, if possible, to end your movement in a shaded area, because guards will not attack you if you're in a shaded area. But this area is a clearing, this area is a clearing, this area is a clearing, this little area is a clearing. So all the light areas all the way over to here, that's a clearing. So when the guards attack during the dark events, if your figure is in a clearing with a guard, then you are automatically captured. So if Maid Marian was here, this guard is visible, and we're in the dark events where guards attack, she would be captured and have to be laid face down on top of him. If she was here, she would not be captured because she's in the shade. But if any part of her is in the clear, so even if part of her was in the shade, if she's not completely in the shade, then she would be captured by this guard. So up in the castle, that's a clearing. Up in the light areas and the walls there, those are basically clearings. Same over here and in the towns. But again, the shade is safe, in the light is not. But it's only if a guard, like here, in this big clearing here, there's not a guard visible, so when the guards attack, then Little John would not be captured. If this guard number 7 happened to be flipped face up when you're in the dark events at the guards attack step, and Little John was here, then he would be captured and have to be laid face down on that guard. And just to be clear, if a guard is face up and you move into that clearing on your turn, if Little John moved here, he's not automatically captured. The guards will only capture you when a red disc is drawn and you're doing the dark events and you get to the guard's attack step. Then if that guard is still visible, then Little John would be captured. So, for example, if Little John had moved in here on his turn, on the next turn the red disc is drawn. This guard was visible when Little John moved in here, but the step prior to the guard's attack is the draw seals. If a seal is drawn that has the number 7 guard on it, he would get flipped back over, and Little John would get lucky and not get captured during the guard's attack step. But he could get unlucky if he moved in here and there was no guard visible, but during the draw seal step, a seal was drawn that flipped this guard over. Then, unfortunately, in the next step of the dark events where the guards attack, Little John is going to be captured and have to get placed on the guard. So hopefully you've got that now. A couple of other things to mention about the guard's attack. If several player characters are in a clearing when the guard's attack, the guard can only capture one character, so he'll capture one that's closest to him. So in this case, Little John would be captured, but not Maid Marian. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but when a player does get captured, the land loses 2 hope. If a player is already captured when the guards attack, the land doesn't lose another 2 hope if they've already been captured. It's only when they're freshly captured that the land loses 2 hope. Alright, so that's the guard's attack step of the dark events. The next step is the time passes event. So in the introductory scenario, we didn't put any hourglasses on this book, which is called the Bad End book. But normally during a scenario, at the beginning of the scenario during setup, you'll be told to place a number of hourglasses on this book. So for example, 7. So we'll say during the scenario setup we place 7 hourglasses on there. So during the time passes step of the dark events, you'll remove 1 hourglass from that book. If the bard is down on the 0 space of the Banner of Hope, you would remove an additional hourglass from that book. During this time, you'll also remove an hourglass from any noblemen or guards that have one placed on them on the board. So during this step, if you ever remove the last hourglass from the Bad End book, then the players lose the scenario or the adventure, and they'll have to play it again. But as long as you accomplish whatever the aim of the adventure is before the last hourglass is removed from the Bad End book, then the players will win the adventure. Alright, so those are the steps that happen whenever the red disc is drawn. Let's talk about objects now. I mentioned that when you defeat a nobleman, usually besides getting to move the bard up 2 on the Banner of Hope, they usually display some object that a player can gain. Also, some tiles that you turn over or inspect may, when you're reading in the book for that tile, it may say you gain a certain object. So, for instance, on this tile, you'll see it's possible you can gain a rope or a sword or a horn. Actually, this can get flipped over later during other scenarios, and there's quite a few other objects that you can gain as well. If a player gains an object, they just put a cube of that color on that object. So in this case, Little John would have this sword because he's placed a cube of his color on that object. And the first couple of pages of the book show you what the use is of all the possible objects. So for the sword object, the ability that gives you is when you're doing a defeat action, so you're trying to defeat a guard or a nobleman or a special character or a carriage. It allows you to draw one additional cube from the bag. And you can have up to 2 swords, so if you've managed to find another sword and you've got 2 cubes on the sword object, then you can draw 2 cubes instead of 1 cube. But you can have at the maximum of 2 swords. So anyway, the different objects, as I said, in the first 2 pages of the book tells you exactly what the different objects are. One I want to talk about now, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I am going to talk about the bow. So if you have, well, let's get, so for example, we have a green cube on the bow here, so that means Robin Hood has a bow. So normally I said to take a defeat action against a guard, you have to either be captured by them or you have to move on to them. And then you can take a defeat action by drawing cubes trying to defeat them. Well, if you have the bow, you can use this arrow token, and as long as you can place it, from your standing figure to where the end of it touches a guard, well, then you can take a defeat action against that guard from a distance. So you don't actually have to move on top of them. And just to be clear, if maybe you were a little closer, you can still use the arrow, the bow. You just have to, as long as it's touching your figure and you can make the end of it touch the guard, then you can still attack or try to defeat the guard without being on top of him. Now, the bow can only be used against guards. You can't use that to try to defeat a nobleman or a special character or the carriage. It can only be used against guards. And I talked about earlier, one of the actions a player can do is if they are touching another character on their turn, one of their actions they can do, instead of examining an object or trying to defeat a character, they can pass an object to another player. So if you do that, if, for instance, well, I got the wrong colors up here, but if Little John was touching Marion's figure there, and he had a bow, he can give, or a sword, he can give that sword to Maid Marian, and to do that you just take his colored cube off and put Maid Marian's color on there. So that now shows that she has the sword. Alright, I think for the most part I've covered most of the rules. Once you've drawn all the discs out of the bag, then you just toss all the discs back in, mix them up, and then start again by having somebody draw a disc out of the bag to see whose turn it is, or if the dark events happen if the red bag. Now there is a few other discs that are not put in the introductory scenario, but starting with the next scenario, I believe they started coming in. So one of those is the gray disc. If the gray disc is pulled out of the bag, then any of the player characters gets to take an additional turn, or gets to take a turn. So the players decide amongst themselves, if the gray disc is pulled, who gets to take a turn. And they take that turn as normal, just as if their disc had been pulled out. If the white disc is pulled out, again, these discs will come in and be added into the bag at the beginning of the scenarios, starting after the introductory scenario. I think the white disc didn't get put in until the second adventure. But anyway, once you get a few adventures in, these will be standard. So the white disc, if that's pulled out, all of the player characters get to take an additional turn in the order they choose. And there's one more color of disc that usually will get added into the bag when you're setting up an adventure, and that is the purple disc. So when the purple disc is drawn, that triggers the violet dark events. So, you have the red dark events, which is the worst, and then the violet dark events, which is not quite as bad, but not good. So when the violet disc is drawn, first thing you'll do is put one violet cube per player into the bag. So of course that makes it more difficult for you to be successful when you're trying to defeat a guard or a nobleman or a carriage or a character. But besides that, during the setup of a scenario, you'll usually be told to place the Guy of Gisborne figure somewhere, maybe at the near the gate tile or some other place on the board. You'll be told to place him. So when a violet cube or disc is drawn and you're doing the violet dark events, besides putting one violet cube per player into the bag, you'll also move the Guy of Gisborne figure toward the nearest player, the player that's nearest to him. And to do that, he has one movement figure, and you'll use it just like you do when you move the players. You have to place it adjacent to where his current figure is, and he has all the same movement rules. He can't move over trees or rocks or buildings or walls or other people or objects. He has to move just like the players do. So you'll use that, and then you'll place his other standing figure at the end of that and pick up the other two. So he'll always move towards the figure that's near the player character figure that's nearest to him. If he ever manages to touch, when he's moving, touch a player character's figure, then they have to lose one of their movement figures permanently for that adventure. So they can choose whether it's their long one or one of their shorter ones, but they have to lose it permanently from that adventure. And for the Guy of Gisborne figure, being in the shade does not hide you from him like it does from the guards. He'll still move towards you even if you're in the shade. There are some places where the Guy of Gisborne figure cannot see you. One of them is if you happen to be in the straw here, he will not see you. And how you get in that straw, you'll find by reading page 214 if you happen to encounter that. And there is a couple of other places, but I'm not going to talk about those because I don't want to do any spoilers. But there's some other places that appear on the map that can hide you from the Guy of Gisborne figure. And I mentioned if he touches you, you'll lose one of your movement figures permanently. He can, if he catches you again, he'll remove another one. If a figure happens to lose all three, if a player happens to lose all three of their movement figures, that's not good. That player will be out of the game, and the land will lose 5 hope. So if it were up here, it would go all the way down to 0. If it was here, so anyway, they lose 5 hope. And remember, being at 0 causes an extra timer to be removed when the red disc is drawn. And that pretty much covers most of the rules for the game. Now I said I've only played through 3 scenarios, so there is a couple of rules yet that I have not encountered. So I can't go talk about those yet, but they will there are a couple of other wooden figures. There's this bird or raven figure that seems to be another movement figure, and some red cubes. So those, I can't speak about how those come into the game because I haven't encountered those rules yet. But I think pretty much the basic rules are what I've gone over, and you get to those by the time you complete the third adventure. So normally at this time, after I've completed a rules overview, I do some example turns, though I don't want to spoil any of the adventures. So I guess I can just maybe make up, not do one of the actual adventures, but just do a couple of example turns with a goal I've made up, just to kind of show how a few turns work. So we'll do that, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, so we'll say during our setup, we put 5 hourglasses here. We put the bard at 7 on the banner of hope. We put the Guy of Gisborne figure here. We'll say maybe Robin Hood starts on 9. Marion starts on 75, and Little John starts on 11. We start with 1 seal, so we'll reveal those. So guard number 5 is visible down here. Guard number 8, he is down here. Okay, guard number 10, he is over here. Yeah, come on. And guard number 11, which that happens to be where Little John is, so we'll just say he starts out captured, kind of like in the introductory scenario. And then we got Nobleman 15, who is here, which is, he starts out visible. Nobleman 16, which is right here, so he starts out visible. And Nobleman 21, which is this one, so he starts out visible. All right. And we'll just say, for example, just making up a scenario, Marion has to talk to the beggar here near the castle wall. All right, so I've put all the discs, and I put a number of purple cubes and white cubes into the bag that I just made up. But as I said, the adventures would tell you exactly what you need. All right, so I'm going to reach into the bag and pull out a player disc. I got a gray, so remember, a gray means that players that can decide amongst themselves who gets to take a turn. So we'll say they want Little John to go so he can try to defeat this guard that's captured him. So he's going to reach in and draw a cube. He got a purple, so he's still captured. He's going to draw, remember, he can draw up to 3. He's going to reach in and draw another one. Uh-oh, another purple. So he's still captured. He can draw one more. So he's going to reach in here, and he's going to draw out a white. Okay, so he's successful. So that will flip this guard back over. It's going to raise 1 on the banner of hope. It's also going to put an hourglass on that guard. Now, I'm going to show you something that I don't like about it. You can see having to pull these tiles up and flip them over all the time. It really starts fraying the edges of these tiles. So I don't know what they could have done different to make these tiles more sturdy, but after several games, these things are going to really get torn up. So that's one of my negative comments about this game. But all right, so Little John. Oh, and I actually, because he didn't move, I should have got to thrown an extra white cube into the bag, because he saved strength by not moving on his turn. And so then and this little tile right here kind of shows you the actions. You move if you don't use your long movement figure. You get to throw a white cube into the bag. Then you can either inspect a tile with a question mark or try to defeat guard or nobleman or whatever. And there is this is shown in the early scenarios before you have the option of the third thing you can do on your turn, which is to pass an object. And it's, again, you get to do one of these things, not a combination of them. All right, so that's Little John's turn. So now we draw another disc out of the bag and see what we get. Our green, so that's going to be Robin Hood's turn. So we know our goal for this is somebody needs to come talk to this guy. Now, normally the aim for a mission is more complicated than that, but I'm just trying to do it for my example scenarios. But there is a nobleman here which Robin Hood wants to try to defeat, because he knows he's going to get a sword and get to move the bard up too if he defeats that guy. So he will use his long movement, so he's not going to save strength because he's not going to and then I think if he just puts his other standing figure there, he's touching him. But he did use his long figure, so he's not going to get to throw a white cube in and save strength. But he picks this one up. All right, he's touching the nobleman, so that was his movement. Now he's going to try to defeat that nobleman. So now he's going to draw cubes out of the bag. Well, if I can find any. All right, that's one. Maybe I didn't. Uh-oh, two. He's got one more draw. Oh, three. All right, he doesn't defeat him. All right, but nothing negative happens. He just doesn't defeat him. All right, so that's going to end his turn. So now we draw another disc out of the bag, and we got white. Oh, so now all the characters get to take a turn. They decide the order. So we'll say Marion's going to start moving toward the beggar, so she's going to use her long movement here. And then this one here, she's got to go around these trees. She can't go over those trees. There, and then her other figure there. And then so now she'll pick up. Now because she used her long movement figure, she doesn't get to throw a white cube into the bag. Okay. Little John gets to take his turn. So maybe he just wants to inspect this wheel. What's at that wheel? So he's just going to use one short figure. So he's moving, and then he'll put his other standing figure there. And then he would turn to page, that's 180, so he would turn to page 180 in the book and look at which scenario he's doing. So maybe he's doing Lance's scenario, so then that would say turn to page 183. He would turn to page 183, and it says, oh, you find a wagon wheel, and underneath it is a sword. So you gain the sword object. So then he gets to take one of his blue cubes and put it on the sword object. And then it says to flip over tile 180. So flip it over, the wheel's gone. He's got the item from there, so that's not there anymore. So that's his turn. Robin Hood gets another turn because we drew the white disc, so they're all getting an extra turn. So Robin Hood, he's going to try to defeat that nobleman again. So he's not going to move, so that allows him to, he saved strength, so he gets to throw a white cube in there. So we'll mix them all up, and he's going to draw out, and he gets another purple. All right, he's got two more draws, and he gets a white, so he's successful. So he gets to flip this nobleman face down again, and he gets +2, move the bard up 2, and he gets a sword object. We also put a hourglass on him. So Robin Hood gets to put a cube on the sword, showing he's got one, and the bard gets moved up 2. Alright, so they all got their free turn. So now we draw another disc out of the bag. And we get yellow, so Marion gets her turn now. So she's going to move again, and she could try to stop and inspect here, but she's just going to move because she's trying to get over there and talk to that guy, as that's what she needs to do for her mission. So she's going to move along here and then put her figure. Alright, that's her movement. Nothing to inspect, nobody to defeat, nobody to give an object to, so that's pretty much all she can do. So now we draw another cube, and we got Little John's. So now he's going to move. So he decides just to, well, there's a nobleman over here. So he's going to try to move to him. He doesn't want to use his long if he doesn't have to. Let's see if he places this at an angle. Yep, he touches him. So he didn't use his long movement, so he does get to throw another white cube into the bag. And now he's going to try to defeat that nobleman. So we'll mix those up. He's going to draw a cube out. And we've got a purple. Another purple. He has one more draw, hoping for a white. No, he fails. So, alright, nothing happens though. That's going to end his turn. Unfortunately, now we know the only thing left is the purple and the red in there, so nothing good's going to happen. Alright, so we draw the red, so we go to dark events. So if there was a carriage visible, it would be turned down and it would be turned up in the castle and it would have escaped. The players couldn't have gotten to it. Next, hope in the land sinks 1 per player, so it's going to go down 3. Luckily we moved it up by defeating guards and noblemen. Alright, next a seal is drawn from the bag. So we got this. Alright, so we have to flip over guard 4. He is way over here. We have to flip over guard 6, and he is way down here. We have to flip over guard 9. He is over here. You see, again, these things start getting torn up. We have to flip over guard 11, but we don't because he's got an hourglass on him, so he won't get flipped over. Then we flip over nobleman 13. He is up here. We flip over nobleman 18, and he is down here somewhere. Oops. And you can, when you're flipping them over, you can see what object they're going to give you if you defeat them. And finally we flip over nobleman 19, which he is back over here. Alright, so we've drawn the seal. Alright, next guards will attack. So let's look over here. Robin Hood is in a clearing with a guard. See, this is all one clearing. He's not in the shade. So this guard is going to capture Robin Hood. So he's going to get placed over here face down. Unfortunately, Little John is also in a clearing. He's not in the shade with a guard. So he's going to get captured. And Maid Marian is in this big clearing here, but guard did not get flipped face up in this clearing, so she's not captured. Each time a player is captured, they look 2 hope is lost, so we're going to have to go down 4 hope here. Alright, next time passes, so we'll remove 1 hourglass from the bad end book. And if the bard was at 0, luckily he's not, but if he was, we would have to remove an additional hourglass. Alright, we know there's only one more disc in here that hasn't been drawn, and that's the purple one. So now we draw it, so now we have to throw 1 violet disc per player into the bag, so that's going to be 3. And then Guy of Gisborne will move toward the nearest figure, which that's going to be Maid Marian, so we'll just have him move toward her. I can't really go over another person, so he doesn't move very far, but there he is. Alright, and now we know we've drawn all discs out of the bag, so we would put them back in. Put them all back in. Mix them up good, and then another player would draw a disc out of the bag and see whose turn it is. And that's how the game goes. Till you either run out of hourglasses on the bad end book, and then the players have lost the scenario, or the players complete whatever the scenario is. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I think you can see how the game plays. As I've said, I've played through the first 3 scenarios. I won the first 2, and then I ended up losing the third one. So when I play that one again, I'll have to flip this over to the other side and play it as if I'm went. As I mentioned, there's different options when you inspect tiles with a question mark, that instead of looking at the section where you're playing it for the first time, you look at the section where you're playing it for the second time. But I've been enjoying it. You know, like I said, I just got this game recently, so just played it over the last couple days. Thought I'd do a video on it. But yeah, it's fun. I've just been playing it by myself, not with anybody else. But I'm sure it's, you know, even more fun if you're playing with other players. I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.